This sounds like fun.
I like it.
I was going to ask you a question because, I can't help but wonder if the success that has been had over the last couple of years, the last decade really, building some of these big campaign movements in New South Wales, and there's been a few of them, not just CSG, WestConnex, the incinerator out in Western Sydney, the T4 coal loader up in Newcastle. There'll be many others that people can point to. Governments have been not happy about that, and they've been really reacting. They've been cracking down on people in terms of access to the law, access to resources. I don't know, is that a response to the work having Greens in Parliament?
Yeah, I think it's on now? Yeah. I think that's true. I think that what we're seeing is the idea that actually conservative governments particularly, but governments that just aren't doing things that people like, are cracking down on the idea of people's rights and civil liberties to be able to engage in protest and to participate collectively. I think the other part of that is that we are not very good as a left and as a movement, as a progressive movement of people, in recognising the commonality across campaigns. One of the most amazing things that I heard at a conference years ago was the fact that the corporate sector, even though they're competing for profits, can all go into a room with government and lobby for the fact that what they want is less regulation and more tax concessions. And so no matter what your business is and what your company is, no matter if you're absolute competitors, you can sit at a round table and agree to government that they're the two things that you want, and everyone benefits from that in the corporate world. And I think what we need to get better at as a community is to say, well, the things that are valuable to us are those fundamental, from my old school amnesty days, are those basic sort of three freedoms of freedom of expression, association and assembly. And actually our freedoms to be able to do those things, those rights to be able to engage with those things, are connecting communities across the movement, whether you're campaigning against sniffer dogs, whether you're campaigning against coal seam gas, or you're campaigning for a new accessible train station, you need to be able to have those rights protected and enjoyed. I think it's a key priority. It's actually jumping across, it's actually one of the reasons why I think one of the things we should be pushing for in 2019 is a need for a Human Rights Act in New South Wales. We need to be able to have some legislated human rights protections. I think that's really important. It's something that I'm keen to push for. And, if we were lucky enough to have the balance of power, I can say now that it'd certainly be something that I'd be talking about.
Well, I might just ask one more question. It's a bit linked, because alongside this issue of, communities being effectively shut down or shut out, there's a growing frustration in the community that's quite palpable now, and disappointment about politics, parliaments, politicians. It's understandable. You and I live in and amongst it. We see why people would be immensely frustrated by their level of representation. Are we being stung by that as well? Do you think people see us as a bit the same in some ways?
I've sold out. I'm wearing a suit to politics in the pub, mate. I think that there's a real risk around it. And it's a little bit like the risk, to go on a tangent for a second, it's a little bit like the risk I feel around how we talk about the scandals in public housing. Because on one hand, I love public housing and I want us to have more public housing, but the successive governments in New South Wales have underfunded public housing such that I have endless current affair stories that I could leak to the media or give to the media about the scandals in public housing. But I choose not to, for the fact that actually I want public housing to be seen as what it is, empowered good residents doing what they can and underfunding of maintenance. So I think in that sense the risk is, if we become too anti-politics and anti-politician, that can be confused with the idea of being anti-democracy and anti the good parts of collective action and engagement. And I think the risk with that is that's where you get the sort of populist, insert first name, last name, end with party here, kind of political success of the Senate, whether it's Xenophon or Palmer or Hanson or whoever, Lambie or whoever it is. So I think that's the risk of us being too anti-politics. I think the challenge for us is to be more real, and I'm aware that the longer I'm an MP, the less real that I am at things, and I try very hard to truth talk wherever I can, because I feel like the longer you're a politician, the more you're shining up your words and you don't say what you're actually thinking. Yeah? So maybe I'll say what I'm actually thinking.
Yeah, do it.
All right.
I wonder as well that everywhere I spend a lot of time in regional areas, people commonly say government asks them a lot of questions, but they don't really actually care what the community say. And so this idea of consultation, this is a bit the same of, people feeling like they're shut out of the system. They're also sick of being asked questions and not being heard. And there's quite a lot of focus now, not so much on community consultation, which has become, realistically quite meaningless, but now community participation. And I mean, the Greens have always wanted decision-making made as close as possible to the level at which it's impacting people. But to me, I think, I really reflect on when we are going out there with new ideas, how are we encouraging before we do that people's participation in the development of those ideas? Because I think that there is a frustration that all, whether it be politicians or think tanks or whoever, that they're just out there pushing an agenda that hasn't really come from something fundamental within the community and a desire for change or a desire for something new and something better. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The thing that I think is most interesting is to talk, because you've come from the perspective of having been in campaigner world, having been in staff world, having been an MP. And the thing that I feel like more and more is the longer I've been an MP, the more I feel like I'm actually using the resources to be a campaigner. And I just happen to be an MP, so I get those resources. And so I feel like I feel like I've ticked the box of how to be an MP. I'm now kind of being the campaigner again without that. How do you feel like the difference is, but also how do you reckon that is different for the Greens in the upper house and in that kind of role than it is for other parties?
Yeah, it is so weird. Jenny and I, luckily we're sort of only one floor apart, so we talk quite a bit, and more so even lately because we've been working on some sort of shared projects. But I've noticed that there's a pretty big disconnect with the other parties between what goes on in the lower house, where their MPs have to be far more reactive to local needs, and what goes on in the upper house. In the upper house for the other parties, they're the party apparatchiks, is my experience. And look, that's all right. I like political parties. I think they're a good vehicle for policy debate and organisation, which is really useful for taking forward ideas and reflecting the community. But more and more, it seems like the apparatchiks hold the day in terms of upper house positions. And I think for the Greens, that's not what we are at all. Yeah. We are, and the expectation comes from our membership and our supporter base, and I think reflects how we've come to be a political force, is that we are seen as sort of the go-to campaigners. The unfortunate thing for us is we've all got 7 or 8 portfolios. I mean, I'd love to have 2 big things I could work on. We'd do that much better. That's always been the challenge. But I think a lot of the other parties look at us and I actually think they quite respect the work of Greens in the upper house, because we get across so much stuff. We are hyperactive in the communities. We're expected to act much more like full service campaigners than political operators. And I think that's useful, and we should never lose that.
Okay, we're now going to have a 5-minute break, well, a 4-minute break now, and then we'll come back for half an hour. That's all right. Half an hour of question time.